Good to see you all this morning. This is always one of my favorite talks at SAEM, and it's really, really great to have students at this conference. So I'm Kathy Hiller. I'm currently the Regional Dean at the IU Bloomington campus. I came recently from the University of Arizona, and I went to Ohio State for medical school and Denver for residency. So got all 4 areas of the country. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how all residencies aren't necessarily the same, and there are lots of options in residencies. So we're going to talk about these things in particular. We're going to talk about location. What does it mean when you're looking at academic versus community versus county programs? Size, reputation, the 3 versus 4-year debate, and then a little bit on combined residencies. So when they survey students, thank you. How's this? You can hear it? Okay, good. When they survey students and they explicitly ask, like, what was it that made you decide to go to this residency? By far, the most important factor is location. It is the #1 reason why people choose a residency. And when you're looking at residencies, you want to think about location too. And you want to think about it in a couple different contexts. So first of all, does it fit your life? Like, if it's important for your mental well-being to surf every day, you probably don't want to come to Indiana, right? But if your mother lives in Bloomington and you're about to have a kid and you know that you need that family support, we're a great option. Come on. So will it fit the rest of your life? You also want to think about kind of whether the catchment area for that emergency department is going to give you the experience that you want in emergency medicine. So if you're very interested in intra-city, gritty, knife and gum club medicine, then go to Denver, right? You want a big catchment area in a very large city. But if you're planning on practicing community medicine for the rest of your career, consider someplace that's maybe a little bit less urban, maybe a little bit more suburban, or not necessarily inner city. Cost of living is an important consideration, right? Y'all have an average of $200,000 in debt when you graduate from medical school, and you really got to think about finance at some point. And then you want to think about the job market after emergency medicine. So as Dr. Ghazandi mentioned, there are some very, very competitive job markets out there. And so again, if you have to be in LA, you really want to think about doing a residency in that area so that you can set yourself up for success afterwards. So there's a couple different sort of flavors of residencies. Academic residencies have a sponsoring institution that's a school of medicine, and that's literally what defines them. They're frequently at a very large tertiary or quaternary care center. They're usually opposed, which means there are multiple other residents in the mix as well. So you've got family medicine docs in the ED, you've got surgery docs in the ED, you've got ortho residents in the ED, lots and lots of other residents. Lots of other learners. You've got medical students, fellows, sometimes other allied health fields like nursing students, APPs, respiratory therapy students, pharmacy residents, et cetera. And then their focus is going to be on that academic mission. So that includes the 3 legs of the stool, right? Not just teaching, but also research and then service. County residencies are usually very high volume, very high acuity. Maybe less resources than some of the academic or corporate type residencies. They may not have that newest or latest gadget that goes on the ultrasound. They may have a very, very intense trauma experience, and then frequently they serve very underserved populations. And then community residencies are sort of a mix. Like, there's lots of different kinds of community residencies out there too. The sponsoring institution may actually be a school of medicine, so it might be a mixed academic community. It might be the hospital that's the sponsoring institution, or the health system, or a corporate medical group. So there's actually a wide range of different community residencies. They might be high volume, high acuity, or not. And then those places, you might actually get a chance to learn a lot more about what it means to practice in the corporate practice of emergency medicine. So more on administration, more on business, more on EMRs and billing and all of the the things that go into emergency medicine other than medicine itself. And some of them are actually very, very well funded. Not all of them, though. All right, the next thing to think about is size. So the minimum number of residents you can have in an EM residency is 6 per year. So the very smallest number of residents a residency that's fully complete can have is 18. There are some residencies that are much, much larger than that. Much larger than that. And as the size of a residency grows, the size of the faculty grows, the size of the facility, the size of the ED. So think about kind of what that looks like in terms of your training. In very large residencies, you may not see your fellow residents at all for 6 months or even a year. In small residencies, it's going to be a tight-knit group. While you may not see each other in the EDs, you're definitely going to know each other's names. If that's important to you, then pick a smaller residency. All right, so there's a lot of people starting their 4th year. When you look at this EKG, what do you think? I see all the quizzical looks, and that's exactly right. I look at this EKG, and I'm like, that makes no sense whatsoever. Someone who doesn't understand EKGs made this picture. And that's a little bit like what reputation is, right? So as Dr. Gisandi mentioned, you want to get really good advice from really good people. But the truth is, reputation is highly contextual. So you ask 5 of us who we think the top 10 residency programs in the country are, you're going to get 5 different answers. So every residency out there is accredited by the Acgme, which means they've gone through some very, very rigorous and continuous process improvement standards. So you can actually be assured that no matter where you go, you're going to get a very good education and very good training. Now, if you've got someone on your list that maybe didn't pass their last site visit or is on probation, those are the ones you might consider. And it might be for a very small issue that you can track down and explain away, but really as long as they're Acgme accredited, you're good. All right, yes? So you can definitely see which programs are on probation. Acgme.org, I believe, is the website. They won't necessarily tell you which standards. That's something you'll have to ask. All right, so I actually graduated from a 4-year residency program, but I was the core faculty at a 3-year program for almost 2 decades. So I have a good handle on both of these. And I'll tell you, when I was a resident, one of my seniors said, man, I wish I'd never done this residency program. It was the $250,000 mistake. I have to tell you, there are definitely pros to going to a 4-year program. I finished residency, and I was absolutely ready to just step into an attending role. Some of my graduating 3-year residents, I felt like maybe could have used a little extra time in the oven, a little extra baking before we let them loose on their own, but everyone kind of ends up in the same place after at least a year, about a year. So again, we talked about the RRC and the Acgme. When you create a 4-year residency, the Acgme requires that you justify why. So what are you going to do with that extra 4th year? So if the residency has a good explanation for that and it matches up with something that you're interested in, great, go for it. That's a program for you. But if they don't really have a good explanation as to why 4 years, then you might just think about whether it's worth it to you. And then I'll tell you right now, in light of the workforce study, in light of all the changes in the practice of emergency medicine, right now, all of the leaders in our professional organizations are talking about whether we should double down on one versus the other. EM is the only specialty that the Acgme has actually allowed to have 2 pathways, a 3-year and a 4-year. I'm not sure how long they're going to tolerate that. We'll see. And then I'll just point out that if you're looking after residency in a job market that has a 4-year residency, for example, Denver, then you definitely need to go to a 4-year program in order to be hired into that market. There's no way Denver was going to hire someone who graduated from a PGY 1, 2, 3 program, their first year out of residency, to supervise their 4th year residents. So something to just consider. And then very briefly, we'll talk about combined programs. These are small, very niche programs, and they're difficult to advise around, and you absolutely have to have the right advisor for this. So you have to know someone who's actually involved with one of these programs. And really the big thing they'll tell you is you really have to have a clear plan as to why you want both. Is there a reason why you want to be both a pediatrician and an emergency physician? So the biggest piece of advice I can give you is just make sure you have a really good advisor for this, because, and a mentor, because they are very, very different than just straight emergency medicine residencies. And I'll pause there and take any questions.
So you graduated from a 3-year program, and you're a few years out, and now you're trying to get a attending position at a 4-year program. Is there still bias against you in that situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question, just to have it on the mic, is if you graduated from a 3-year program, you're a few years out, and now you're interested in a place that has a PGY 1 through 4 program, is there still a bias? So there's a lot that happens after you finish a residency: fellowship training, experience in leadership roles. It really kind of depends. I think some places, and I'm looking at Gannon right now, they may still actually kind of give you a little bit less of a kind of green light from the get-go. It's really more up to you to prove why you're a good fit for that place. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I don't know if this is on. Yeah, I think it diminishes for sure over time, and I think fellowship probably changes the math quite a bit. So if you've completed a fellowship, you're probably considered the same. And then if you've been in the community and have a clinical experience, again, where you can prove a justification for that. So it's a small hurdle, but not nothing.
Yes. So the question was, considering the workforce and the job report, is a 4-year program a safer option? Do we think a 4-year program will be more popular this year? I don't know that I've ever really thought of it that way. I'm having a hard time thinking about why a 4-year program might be more popular given the scarcity of, or given the lack of scarcity of spots. What do you think?
Yeah, I think traditionally 4-year programs have not been popular because of all the reasons Dr. Hiller denoted. They're still the vast minority of overall EM programs is 4-year programs. And
it's about 2/3, 1/3, so not vast
sorry,
majority.
yeah.
But it is definitely.
And that number has actually increased over the last couple of years as programs have transitioned from 3 to 4-year. I think it's also really hard to understand more popular. It seems like something we should know, but we don't really, right? We as an individual program know how many applications we have, but it's not like that's widely available to compare how many position applications per spot, et cetera. So I don't expect that it would be a huge jump in terms of like, I really want to be at this 4-year program and it's going to be way more competitive this year. I can't say anecdotally that I noticed any difference in last year's match cycle, which was after the jobs report, and so presumably would have been affected by that.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I think the big deciding factor is going to be whether the Acgme kind of puts its foot down and says you have to decide as a specialty whether you're a 3-year program or a 4-year program. And then there are all kinds of downstream effects to that related to funding of residencies and total number of spots and all kinds of stuff. So we'll see.
And I would just, back to your point about academics, so getting a job in academics, I think fellowship has become more important to that. I think, just reflecting on my experience, I did a 3-year residency and then got an academic job. That's a little bit harder now. So I know our residents, better than half are usually doing a fellowship. And again, this is really more for academics. If you want to work in the community, it's probably not necessary to have that extra niche. But those are things that these are really great questions that I think, we're all kind of working to solve right now. So.
I'll also say that line between community and academic, which has always traditionally been a very hard and fast line, is becoming much more blurred. Like, there's definitely hybrid programs out there. There's definitely hybrid positions out there. We're really talking through what that entire spectrum looks like rather than a very binary definition, too.
What were you? Oh.
That's a really great question. So just to reiterate, is the Acgme leaning towards 3-year versus 4-year if they do decide which side will it land on? So the Acgme is looking to us as the content experts here to decide what we feel as a specialty is required in order to train residents in emergency medicine. There is a work group of leaders from all the major institutions, and we can't even decide. So I'll tell you, it's a sticky one. It's a tough one. There are good arguments on both sides, and these are some of the best minds in emergency medicine, and it's really tough. Yeah.
When looking at programs and trying to get a good idea of the catchment area of population that you see a lot, serve a lot in that area, what's the best resource to go about finding that information?
Ooh, great question. So when looking at the catchment area for a residency, how can you get more information on the population served? So I would say the residency itself probably should have a handle on this. They should actually be able to tell you a little bit about it. There are a whole lot of health and human services websites that get at this as well. So there's something called the Social Vulnerability Index that the CDC puts out. Health and Human Services puts out information on things like, very basic things even like age and ethnicity in an area. There's a lot of different resources out there, but I would probably start first with the residency itself.
And we were kind of texting back and forth about step 2 timing.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to get advice throughout, the coming years that may be a little bit conflicting. And so one thing that we would I don't always advise students with a strong step 1 to wait to take step 2. And one of the things that Dr. Gisandi said that I think should resonate with you is almost all of you are going to do better on step 2. So sometimes I see that as this is another opportunity to enhance your application. So I will say, and advising is personal, I tend to have the students I advise take step 2 somewhat early. But I do see his point that there's a chance that, if you get a 270 on step 1, there's just not a whole lot of ceiling above that. So I could kind of see that, but I would say my opinion, and then I'll let you go, is most of the students I advise, I have them take step 2 somewhat early on.
So anyone in this room that has a scaled step score, you are the last of your kind. So this is a short-term problem.
Right.
There will be probably for the next 3 match cycles, actually, a group of people who have a scaled step 1 score and a pass-fail step score. So there's going to be a combination of both of these. When you talk to program directors in emergency medicine, they're worried about this. I think the preference signaling is going to help, and we'll hear a lot more about that. And I'll tell you, I have a little bit of a different perspective from the dean's office. There may be schools that actually require you to take step 2 before you apply. I see some heads nodding. You've already heard this maybe from your schools. So the next few years are going to be tough for us too, to kind of figure out how to adjust how we view and weigh information in the application in light of all of the changes in the workforce and the milieu and environment in general. So I think the overall message this morning from Dr. Gisandi was absolutely spot on. You're going to be fine if you're average, and you absolutely need an advisor no matter what. The only other kind of piece I would add to that is just be aware that your local practices and your local experts also need to understand kind of the national perspective, because things are moving really fast right now.
Yeah, I saw that as one of the keys that he said, you know, we've always said you need an emergency medicine advisor, but the thing that really resonated with me is you need an emergency medicine advisor who knows last year's match. And that's very specific. It's not, you know, somebody who was a clerkship director and now they're working in the community and they were really familiar with how things were 5 years ago, because they are changing that quickly. So why don't we?
And can I just end with one last thing? Sorry.
Yes.
The point about anesthesia was a really good one too. So it was 25 years ago, and it literally took the specialty 20 years to bounce back. So we need to learn from that. We need to learn from that and hopefully not make the same mistakes. And you guys are the key to that. So EM is a great place to be. It's a great specialty. There will, I guarantee you, be a job for you when you're done. And I know I'm preaching to the choir because you all are here, but it's a really great specialty. Thank you for being here. We're really excited for this group to be our colleagues in the future.